Hey everyone, welcome back to Stronger Minds, Stronger Men, the podcast where we explore men's mental health from the inside out. I'm your host, Austin, and I just want to say thank you for being here. Whether you've been with us for a while or this is your first time tuning in, I appreciate you showing up for these conversations. They matter. Today, we're diving into a topic that I believe is long overdue. It's breaking the cycle. More specifically, what it actually means to raise emotionally healthy boys in a world that often teaches them the opposite. Now, that might sound like a big topic, and it is, but it is also one we can't afford to keep ignoring. From young age, boys are often taught directly or indirectly that showing emotion is a sign of weakness. Man up, don't cry, be tough. These aren't just harmless sayings. They are messages that plant deep roots over time. They grow into emotional suppression, disconnection, and even shame around vulnerability. And if we don't talk about it, we just keep passing that down generation after generation. So today, we're going to unpack that. We're going to look at how emotional suppression gets passed down, often unintentionally, through parenting, media, school systems, and even cultural norms. We'll talk about the impact this has, not just on boys as they grow into men, but on their relationships, their mental health, and their ability to connect with themselves and others. But this is the part I'm most excited about. We're also going to talk about how we can do better. Because we can do better. Whether you're a parent raising sons, a teacher, shaping young minds, an uncle, a brother, a coach, or just someone who wants to see real change in how we raise and support boys, this episode is for you. This isn't about blaming past generations. It's about recognizing what hasn't worked and being intentional about creating something better. Because emotional healthy boys become emotionally healthy men, and that changes everything. Let's get into it. Let's be real. Most boys are taught early on that vulnerability is a weakness. Things like toughen up, stop crying, man up. These aren't just random phrases we throw around. They're more like instructions, lessons, messages that get repeated so often they start to become invisible. Just part of the way we think boys are supposed to be. And over time, they build something deeper, a blueprint for emotional disconnection. Now, think about your own upbringing for a minute. How were you taught to handle sadness? What happened when you felt angry or scared? Were you allowed to express it? To talk about it? Or were you told directly or indirectly to push it down, shake it off, or deal with it quietly? Because here's the thing, we can't talk about raising emotionally healthy boys without first taking a good, honest look at what we were taught growing up. The patterns we absorbed, the things we were told were normal, the emotions we were allowed to feel, and the ones we weren't. Studies show that boys receive significantly less emotional support than girls, even as early as preschool. Think about that. At the age of 4 or 5, when kids are just starting to understand what they feel, boys are already being taught that some emotions aren't okay. Not because someone sat them down and said, don't feel, but because of how the adults around them respond. That gap only grows with age. When a girl cries, she gets comforted. When a boy cries, he's often corrected. So, what starts as something subtle, a look, a shrug, you're fine, becomes internalized as a code. Don't feel, don't talk, don't break. And eventually, that turns into silence, emotionally numbness, or it gets redirected into anger, withdrawal, or even violence. Because if you don't have healthy ways to express pain, it will find another way out. This is why breaking that cycle matters. This is why we need to have these conversations. Because the world doesn't need more emotionally shut down men. It needs men and boys who are emotionally aware, who can communicate, who can sit with discomfort and not be undone by it. And that doesn't just happen by accident. It happens when we start teaching boys that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. That feelings aren't dangerous, they are human. And that asking for help isn't soft, it's brave. So if you are someone who's helping raise boys, whether you're a dad, a coach, a teacher, or just someone in their life, the first step is to check in with your own emotional blueprint. What were you taught? What are you still carrying? And what are you willing to unlearn so you don't pass it on? Because the fact is, it starts with us. So, what actually happens when we raise boys to suppress their feelings? We create men who don't know how to process them. And that doesn't just go away with time. It shows up in real painful ways. It shows up as anxiety, as anger, as depression, as substance use, as violence against others, and sometimes, typically, against himself. Because when you grow up being told or shown that your feelings don't matter or that expressing them makes you weak, you don't stop having emotions. You just stop expressing them in healthy ways. Have you ever met someone who couldn't say, I'm hurt, but would pick a fight instead? Someone who felt overwhelmed, but didn't know how to ask for help. So they just shut down or lashed out. That kind of behavior, we often label it as being cold, aggressive, or distant. But underneath that, that's not just personality. That's unprocessed pain. That's emotional survival mode. Most of the time, what looks like overreacting is actually someone reacting to a lifetime of emotional neglect. Sometimes self imposed, sometimes generational. Either way, it's not random. It's the outcome of a system that taught them to survive by staying silent. And here's the heartbreaking part: silence has a cost, and boys are paying for it with their mental health. Let's bring in some context. According to recent data from the CDC, suicide remains one of the leading causes of death among men, especially young men. And yet, men are far less likely than women to seek therapy, talk openly about their struggles, or even admit when something's wrong. Why? Because somewhere along the way, they learned that asking for help is shameful, that expressing emotion makes you less of a man, that being strong is to be silent. But that's one of the greatest myths we've ever passed down. Real strength, the kind that creates connection, healing, and resilience, doesn't come from a silence. It comes from self awareness, from courage, from saying things like, I'm not okay, or I need help, or even just, I don't know what I'm feeling right now, but I want to figure it out. And we have to start making that kind of strength visible to boys from an early age. We don't need boys to stop feeling. We need to give them permission to feel and the tools to deal with it. That means modeling emotional honesty ourselves. That means listening without judgment when they speak. That means making space for discomfort and teaching them that it's okay to not have all the answers right away. Because if we don't, if we keep pretending that silence equals strength, we're going to keep raising generations after generation of boys who grow up into men who are emotionally stranded. But if we do the work, if we start normalizing vulnerability, communication, and emotional intelligence, then when we raise a different kind of man, one who isn't afraid of his own emotions, one who knows how to show up fully for himself, for his family, and for his community. And that's the kind of strength we need more of. So let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about what happens when boys don't learn how to express their emotions, when silence becomes the standard. But let's talk about the flip side. Let's talk about what it does and look like when we raise boys with emotional intelligence. It looks like a boy who can say, "I'm angry because I feel left out," or "I need space right now because I still love you," or even just, "I'm sad and I don't know why." That is power. That's not weakness. That's not softness. That's clarity. That's strength with emotional depth. And it hasn't happened by accident. It happens when the adults around him create space for that kind of honesty and model it themselves. Because here's the truth, raising emotionally intelligent boys doesn't mean raising boys who are too sensitive or unable to deal with the world. It means raising boys who are equipped to handle the world and their inner world with intention. It's not about making boys soft, it's about making them whole. We've spent so long handing boys armor, telling them to be tough, to fight through it, to hide their emotions. What if we started handing them tools instead? Tools like self-awareness, tools like emotional regulation, like empathy, active listening, or simply the ability to pause before reacting. Let me paint a picture. Imagine a 12-year-old boy who's frustrated after school. He just had a rough day. Maybe he got teased or felt overlooked by a teacher. Instead of lashing out at his siblings or shutting down and burying his head in a screen, he says, "I just need a minute to breathe. Today was hard." That might sound simple, but that's huge. That's a win. That's emotional intelligence in action. Or imagine a teenager in a relationship who can say, "When you canceled our plans, I felt rejected. I know that wasn't your intention, but I wanted to be honest about how it landed with me." That's communication. That's conflict resolution. That's the kind of emotional maturity most adults still struggle with. An emotionally healthy boy knows how to name his feelings. I feel nervous. I feel excited. I feel hurt. He knows how to regulate them, not stuffing them down or letting them explode, but knowing what helps him calm down or feel safe. They know how to express empathy, not just understanding his own emotions, but recognizing that and respecting the emotions of others. And then they know how to seek help when needed, whether that's talking to a parent, a teacher, a friend, or even a therapist. Can you imagine the kind of partners, friends, leaders those boys grow up to be? Partners who can communicate instead of shutting down. Friends who can offer real support instead of just distractions. Leaders who can create connections instead of just control. That's what we're aiming for here. Not just emotional intelligence for the sake of a personal peace, but for the ripple effect it creates in families, relationships, workplaces, and communities. And yes, this takes work, it takes patience, it takes modeling, it takes unlearning a lot of what we were taught. But every time a boy is told it's okay to cry, or you're allowed to feel that, or let's talk about what's going on inside, we're slowly planting seeds. Seeds that grow into emotionally healthy men who don't just survive, they thrive. That's the kind of masculinity we should be building. One that includes emotional depth, compassion, and strength. One that's afraid of them. Because when boys don't know that they are allowed to be whole, when they learn how to connect, reflect, and express themselves, they don't just benefit individually, we all benefit. Now, let's talk about solutions. Because, look, awareness is the first step, but it's not the final one. Breaking the cycle of emotional suppression doesn't just happen because we know it exists. It happens because we do something about it. So, whether you're a dad, a mentor, a teacher, a coach, an uncle, or even just someone who wants to make a difference in the life of a boy, here are a few real, practical steps we can take. And I'm not just talking theory, I'm talking about small, consistent actions that help raise emotionally intelligent, mentally healthy boys. So let's break it down. First, modeling vulnerability. This is the number one for a reason. Because if you, as a man, can name your feelings out loud, you're giving permission for a boy to do the same. We can't expect boys to share what they're going through if they've never seen another man do it. And a lot of us didn't grow up seeing that. We saw stoicism, we saw silence, or we saw anger. Because that's the one safe emotion men were often allowed to express. So modeling vulnerability might sound like this: I'm feeling overwhelmed today, and I need a break. I was nervous before that meeting. I feel really disappointed in how that turned out, but I'm trying to learn from it. You don't have to dump your whole emotional world on a kid, but showing him that it's normal to have feelings and to name them is powerful. It creates safety. It gives them a template. Number 2 is to validate emotions. This one might seem obvious, but it's something we often miss in the moment. When a boy is crying, frustrated, or acting out, our instinct is too often to fix it, shut it down, or distract it, instead of trying to validating it first. Saying things like, it's okay to be sad. I hear you. That sounds really frustrating. Telling me more about what you're feeling. Even if the emotion seems too big or not logical, it's real to them. And validation doesn't mean agreeing, it just means acknowledging their experience as true and human. Think of this: if you don't validate the emotion, you lose the opportunity to guide it. But if a boy feels seen, he's far more likely to open up and to trust you. Number three is encouraging emotional vocabulary. Most boys grow up with a very limited emotional vocabulary. They know mad, sad, happy, and maybe I'm fine. That's it. And if those are the only tools in the toolbox, how can we expect emotional intelligence to grow? Start introducing nuance. Are you feeling frustrated or disappointed? Does that feel more like embarrassment or guilt? You seem irritated. Is it something someone said, or are you just feeling off today? You can even make this a fun part of conversation. Some families do a feelings check in at dinner. Name one word that describes your day, and it can't be good or fine. The more language boys have for what they're feeling, the more power they have to understand and manage those emotions. Number four is creating safe space. This is big. Boys need environments where they're not mocked, minimized, or shamed for being real. That means no teasing or sarcasm when they open up, no rushing them through feelings, no telling them to man up or to get over it. Safe space can be physical, like a quiet room where a boy can calm down. But more importantly, they're emotional. They are built through trust, consistency, and the way you respond when a boy takes the risk to be vulnerable. Ask yourself, do the boys in my life feel safe crying in front of me? Talking to me about fear, asking me for help. And if the answer is no, it's not a judgment, it's an invitation to create that space. Number five is reframing masculinity. We've got to start redefining what it means to be a man, especially for the next generation. Because if we don't, they'll keep getting their definitions from social media, peer pressure, or outdated cultural messages. Let's start defining manhood by courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. Kindness, not as a weakness, but as a strength and leadership. Honesty, the ability to be real with yourself and others. And self awareness, the courage to look inwards and grow. We can tell boys being a man doesn't mean you don't cry. It means you're strong enough to feel, to love, to take responsibility for your actions, and to treat others with care. The more we expand the definition of masculinity, the more room boys have to show up as their full selves. Look, no one's perfect at this. We all still are learning. Most of us didn't grow up with this kind of emotional education either, but that's what makes the work so much more meaningful. Every time you choose connection over correction, every time you validate instead of minimize, every time you say, let's talk about it instead of get over it, you are breaking the cycle. You're showing a boy that emotional intelligence isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to its own. And over time, those small moments, they could add up. They shape how a boy sees himself, how he treats others, and how he moves through the world. So don't underestimate the power you have as a father, a mentor, a coach, or a friend. Because that emotional unhealthy men of tomorrow start with emotionally supported boys of today. One of the hardest truths in all of this, a lot of us are out here trying to raise emotionally healthy boys. while we're still healing from our own emotional wounds. Let that sink in. We're trying to teach things we didn't learn, trying to give what we didn't get, and sometimes trying to be the father, the mentor, the guide that we needed when we were younger. That's not easy. Because healing isn't a straight line. It's messy. It's slow. It takes digging into places you might have spent years avoiding or didn't even know needed healing. And at the same time, there's the kid looking up to you, watching how you react, how you speak, how you deal with conflict, sadness, and stress. That's pressure. That's weight. And it can feel overwhelming. But here's the good news. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. It's okay to say, I didn't learn this growing up, but I'm trying now. I'm still figuring this out too. I didn't always handle emotions the right way, but I'm learning how to do it better. That kind of honesty, that's powerful. That's real leadership. Because when boys see you doing the work, when they see the reflect, course correct apologies when needed, and try again, you're teaching them that growth is possible. You're showing them that the strength includes humility and that healing is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. Let me be clear. Healing and parenting can happen side by side. In fact, they often do. You don't press pause on your past just because you become a parent or a role model. If anything, parenting can bring up all kinds of things you thought were buried. Insecurities, fears, old patterns, emotional reflexes you didn't even know were there. Maybe your own father never talked about his feelings. Maybe you were told to man up every time you cried. Maybe nobody ever asked you, how are you really doing? And now here you are trying to build something different. To raise a boy who does know how to talk, how to feel, how to emotionally be whole. And that takes courage. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do for yourself is show up differently for your child. And sometimes the most healing thing you can do for your child is work on healing yourself. You don't have to take and have all the answers. You just have to be willing to ask questions. Things like, why do I react the way I do when my son cries? Why do I shut down when someone brings up feelings? Why do I feel uncomfortable when my kid expresses anger or sadness? Those questions are uncomfortable. Yeah. But that's where growth starts. I want to say this, especially for the men listening. It's not weakness to do this inner work. It's not weakness to face your emotional story. It's strength. It's the deepest kind of strength because it's not just about you anymore. It's about who you are becoming for someone else. Every step you take toward healing, whether it's through therapy, journaling, having real conversations with other men, or just becoming more mindful of your own reactions, every step makes a difference. And even the small ones. So if you're ever felt, I'm not good enough to teach this, or who am I to model emotional health when I'm still struggling myself? I want you to be reminded you're not behind. You're on the path. And the fact that you care about raising emotionally healthy boys, that's already a huge part of the work. Because those boys, They don't need a perfect man. They need a present one, a growing one who's brave enough to break the cycle, not because it's easy, but because it matters. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this episode, it's this: emotional intelligence is not a luxury. It's not some bonus skill, some nice to have. There's time left over after grades, sports, and discipline. It's a necessity, especially for other boys. Because boys who are emotionally intelligent grow into men who know how to show up for themselves, for their partners, for their families, and for their communities. They know how to sit with discomfort. They know how to communicate without exploding or shutting down. They know how to be kind without losing their strength. And they know that being human means having a full range of emotions, not just the ones that world says are okay for men. Every time we choose to listen instead of dismiss, every time we allow a boy to cry, to question, to say, I don't know what I'm feeling, but I need help, we're planting seeds of change. Even if it doesn't look like much in the moment, even if it's messy or awkward or hard, this is how we break the cycle. Not the huge dramatic moments, but with everyday ones. One conversation at a time just before bedtime. One car ride where we actually talk. One moment where you say, I see you, and it's okay to feel that. That's how the next generation of emotional whole men is built. One conversation, one hug, one brave moment at a time. Thanks for being here with me today. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a parent, a teacher, a friend, someone who's trying to raise boys in a better way than how we were raised. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep building a culture where boys are allowed to be whole, not just hard. Because when we support the boys, we change the men. And when we change the men, we change the world. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.